What's happening, guys? Ryan here from GTA Projects. Today I'm going to show you how we installed a pair of racing seats into a BMW E36. As you can see here, they are mounted at the end of the job. We used a pair of sliding seat rails, quite easily available on the internet. Obviously some fasteners you're going to need, which are M10 by 25mm, and I'd suggest using grade 8.8 bolts as they have the required tensile strength for this purpose. In addition to that, you'll need some flat steel stock. 30mm by 5mm is what we used over here. I've pre-mounted the adjustable side mounts onto the seats already. Obviously these have some levels of adjustment. First thing to do is to push the seat backwards, pop the two front protection caps off with a flathead screwdriver, and then undo the 4 bolts with a 16mm socket. The two front ones are nuts, I believe, and the two rear ones are bolts. Then undo the electrical connector harness from the underneath of the seat, just simply unclips, and take the seat out. Simple as that. So on this particular car, we're going to be removing the carpets, and we just cut it out with a knife as we're not going to be using it anymore and it's fairly far gone. So we'll be getting rid of that. Now we can take a look at what we've got to work with. There's 4 points here which we're going to mount the rails to. As you can see here, I'm now taking the measurement of the center to center of the left hand side of the mounting point. And over here the same thing, the center to center of the sill side of the mounting. So I'm just doing a small diagram over here just to make sure that I've got all the measurements written down and we don't get anything mixed up. As you can see, these are the measurements that I got, 358 and 359. Call it 359 on both, that would probably be accurate enough. Secondly, I'm now measuring the length of the actual flat bar that we're going to cut it to. So I just took a quick measurement there, and obviously I'm going to label that onto the drawing so we don't forget any measurements and have to do it again. Obviously it's best to measure twice and cut once to avoid any problems and wastage of materials. So here we go. I came up with 405, 407mm, somewhere around there, and just mark it off with a square and chop it down with a chop saw. Cuts through it like butter, and it's probably the quickest and easiest way of doing it, using a abrasive saw. So there we go, we end up with 2 pieces of flat stock, and these are going to form the basis of the mount. So what I'm doing here is I'm just determining where exactly the holes in the 2 pieces of flat bar are going to sit by taking the overall dimension and subtracting it from the center to center dimension and dividing it by 2. So that will determine how much what the distance is from the end of each side of the flat stock to the center of the holes that we're going to drill. Just marking those points off there, and going to use a pin punch just to mark the center points of the holes, just so when you drill the holes, the drill bit doesn't slide all over the place initially when you're starting the hole off. Use a little bit of lubricant on the drill, and I always use a drill press for this because it's a lot quicker and easier, and a step drill to make the larger holes. Start off with a 3 or 4mm standard drill, and then use the step drill to go up to 12mm diameter holes. We're using M10s for all the mounting hardware, and the one on the vehicle is M10, I believe. However, using M12 holes or 12mm diameter holes is best so that you can have a little bit of adjustability and flexibility of movement. Otherwise, you'll find that things might not be lining up 100%. So drill the holes a little bit bigger and things will go together quite a lot easier. So there we go, we just bolted the 2 rails in place, and I'm offering up the sliding seat rails, trying to see where they're going to go. Decided to just put them in the center of each of the seat rails. Mark them off so that you don't get confused as to which one goes where. I've got the sill side and the tunnel side, and then front and rear markings on both the flat stock and the adjustable mounts. So when we take them off the vehicle, we can put them in position and we won't get confused and weld them in the wrong place. Here you can see just marking the positions where I wanted them to be located, which was, for me, in the center of the side rail, the stock. Removing some of the paint on the side rails where you don't want, where you're going to be doing some welding, and position them flat on the floor, exactly how they were in the vehicle. There you can see how they're going to sit. And we get our welder ready. In this case I'm using a MIG welder, set to quite a high setting because obviously the flat bar is quite a thick stock, and doing a few tack welds to get everything in place. Obviously this needs to be done on both of the rails, and obviously keep safety in mind here. Wear a welding mask at all times. Gloves always a good idea because things get really hot, and just be aware of all the safety requirements for the welding side of things. So obviously turning the rails around so you get some tack welds on the inside in addition to that, and make sure both of them are done. There we go. So we got the two mounted rails, and we'll put them in the vehicle again to make sure that everything's sitting correctly. So here they are mounted in the vehicle. Something to keep in mind is that the two bolts at the rear of these two mounts are replacement ones, as the ones that came with the vehicle were too long. Now we're going to pop in place the frame rail that came with the two sliding mounts, and simply just clips into place like so. So next we're going to measure the actual width of the cross members, and we've got to make sure that they overhang on the left hand side or the inside by a good 50 millimeters or so. And this is because we want to have the seat mounted as close to the transmission tunnel as possible. And the reason for this is because the steering wheel on this particular car is offset towards the center of the car quite a bit. So you want to have the seat mounted to the center of the steering wheel for a comfortable driving position. So obviously just cutting the steel flat stock with the abrasive saw again, and here we put the cross members back in position to double check them. As you can see, we have the overhang on the inside, which allows you to mount that seat all the way tucked in to the center. And on the sill side, we're just sort of mounting it so they're flush with the end of the rails. So next thing to do is mark the center holes where you're going to drill the holes into this piece of flat stock, and you obviously want to align that with the center of the holes on the rails, on the sliding rails. Quite a simple task. Just take your time and make sure it's quite accurate, because you obviously don't want to be drilling twice. So obviously do all four of them, and obviously it's a good idea to at all times mark exactly where the components are going to be in relation to the vehicle. So when you take them out to work on them, you put them back in, you always know where they're going to be. So obviously just got front and rear over there, and obviously as I know the markings are on the top, so I can't get them mixed up. And over here I just use a square to make the markings, and obviously a pin punch to get the center of the holes so that the drilling process is a bit easier. Back on the step drill, ending up with 12mm holes, and put them back in the vehicle and fasten them up using our M10 by 25mm bolt. You should be using grade 8.8s. These are just standard bolts which we're using temporarily, and obviously going to be replaced later on with proper 8.8 bolts for the required strength. As you can see here, put the seat into position. It's sitting quite nicely, and I've centered it on those two cross members. On the inside here you can see all the various holes that the side mounts have, so you have quite a few options. Next, mark the position of the seat. You got your four markings to all four sides, so you know where to cut the holes. And here we go, back on the drill press again. Get the M12 12mm holes again and mount the seat, and there you go. We have a seat mounted to the custom-made rails, and it adjusts forwards and backwards. So the next thing that we're going to do is remove the entire seat mounting unit and do some work on it, because obviously we want to make sure it's quite strong, as it's an essential safety component of the vehicle to have a well secured seat. So back on the welder, and we start adding some more welds, making sure everything's quite strong. You want to set your welder so you're getting good penetration through the steel. Obviously, if you haven't done this sort of thing before, you'll need to do quite a bit of practice, because, as I say, it's quite an essential. You wouldn't want the seat to come loose or fall down, you know, mid driving somewhere or at a track day or whatever. So run a good few beads along, be as neat as you like, spend as much time as you like. One thing you do want to keep in mind is, obviously, the welder creates a hell of a lot of heat. You want to be sure that you're not adding too much heat to the rails, as you can probably warp them, which means that it won't slide backwards and forwards. So what I suggest doing is do a few small welds and keep jumping from one side of the rail to the other. Maybe just give it some time in between welds. You know, the aim is to just not add too much heat. You'll probably find that the grease inside the rails starts to sort of smoke and melt a little bit too. So just go easy on it, but still make sure that you're getting good penetration through the steel. As you can see here, I've just done a few sort of short welds, and obviously go back to it a bit later and run a full bead along there if necessary. However, I'd say about 5-6 of them on the top like that, and then a good sort of 3 or 4 at the bottom. It's going to be plenty welds to keep everything in position. You've got the added strength of the cross members too, to keep everything in sort of one component. And also what I might suggest doing is running or adding some stock to the bottom of the 2 cross members and welding that in place, just to give it a little bit more rigidity, because obviously the steel flat stock does have some sort of flexibility to it. I haven't shown in this video how to add the strengthening, but if you'll imagine maybe a 10mm by 10mm steel solid stock, cut 2 short pieces, maybe 250mm long, and just weld them in place on the underside of each of those 2 cross members, and that'll give you some good rigidity. So obviously just turning it around and getting the welds on the inside, on the underneath as well. As you can see all the heat markings at the bottom there, which is showing that the welding has been fairly decent, as you're getting some decent penetration. If you don't see those markings on the other side of the weld, it's generally a sign that you haven't sort of had enough heat penetration to the steel, and the welds will probably be weak and therefore unsafe, I would have thought. So obviously running some really nice long beads at the bottom. In hindsight, probably would have swapped to the other side and then come back to this side, just to make sure that we're not getting too much heat into those rails. But they seem fairly resilient. Obviously, due to the shape of them, they've got a fair amount of strength. But do be careful, obviously, with the heat warp. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where I show you how we put aluminium side trim over the rails over there, as well as paint them. If you enjoyed this video, please like or subscribe, and good luck with your project.